Hey everybody, in this video what I want to do is talk a little bit about your upcoming weekly analyses. I'll talk a little bit about what they should look like, what the format should be, what the assignment is about, and I want to stress their due dates. Namely, I'll go ahead and say that here. The first one is due September 30th, the second October 31st, the third November 30th. Like I said, in here we'll go into the details of those assignments. Alright, let's talk about that weekly analysis, or weekly analyses, I should say. You have three of them, but the first one is coming up here pretty soon at the end of the month, at the end of September. So let's go over this a bit. So you can find the weekly analyses if you click on assignments, and then you go down to the weekly analyses folder. You will see three here. Weekly analysis 1 is due on the last day of September. Weekly analysis 2 is due on the last day of October, and weekly analysis 3 is due on the last day of November. And really, there is no difference between the assignments in terms of what they are. So you're going to do the same kind of thing three times. Please don't turn in the same paper three times. The same kind of thing three times. And basically what you're going to do is, in your own words, in the appropriate format, which I'll get into in a moment, in your own words, in the appropriate format, you're simply going to recap back to me something that we talked about in class with a little bit of your own commentary on it and your own analysis. So saying back to me in your own words, here's something that we talked about, and I'm calling them weekly analyses to say roughly the amount of content you should be recapping back to me should probably be roughly a week's worth. Now that is an arbitrary chunk of time. You could be spending your 2 to 3 pages on really any topic that interested you, that you want to talk about. Okay, so what I'm going to do here in a moment is I want to talk about some of the stuff that you have available to you to let you know what the weekly analysis should look like, what its format is, and actually I have examples of 3 kinds of weekly analyses here for you under the weekly analysis 1 assignment. You have an example of one that's pretty good. This is a paper that made an A. One that's, I say bad, like low C, high D. Like it's all right. I should say decent instead of bad. It's just not A material. And then one that is this didn't do so well. And one that's terrible. Okay? And predicated on what? So you can see, like, here's an example of a good paper, here's an example of an okay paper, and here's an example of a terrible paper. And when you're working on yours, if it looks like this, you probably need to revise some more. Okay? And also there's a paper formatting exemplar, which is repeated for all of them, but really I could have repeated all 4 of these for each one. And that's going to be, here's what the format should look like. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over at least what the first assignment is, what you should, and like I said, the second and third one are the exact same thing. You're just doing it on a different block of material of your choice. Okay? So I'm going to read the assignment here and then say what these utilities are that you have here too. Alright, so let's talk about the actual assignment. You'll notice here's what it says. Here's what a weekly analysis is. This written assignment shall be an analysis in which the student chooses approximately 1 week of class on which to report and describes in their own words the content lectured upon and read that week. This is not meant to be a mere regurgitation of lecture notes, but an analysis of roughly 1 week's lectures in the student's own words. So all essay submissions must be in double-spaced, 12-point Times New Roman font with 1-inch margins with Chicago-style footnote citations, if you have citations. That is, if you quote, paraphrase, or allude to anything, you should have citations. But if you don't do any of those things, you don't need to have citations, you don't need to have footnotes. And they should be of a length of 2 to 3 pages within the above specified parameters. So at least 2 full pages. That doesn't mean that because you made it to page 2, you have 2 pages. You have 1 page and some change. But don't go past 3 pages. Okay? So if you don't turn it in this format, I'm not going to take it. So make sure it's in the right format. All documents are to be submitted on time, per the assignment, in the proper Dropbox and Blackboard, under the Assignments tab as a Microsoft Word attachment. A .doc, a .docx is fine, so don't send me a link to a Google Doc or a PDF or an RTF or anything like that. Okay, and in fact, where is the Dropbox? Actually, so when it's done, you just click on, say, this one, and where it says Browse My Computer here, you'll click on this, attach your file, hit Submit, and you're good to go. So that's how you submit it. So what is it? Well, let's take a look at a couple of examples. Let me start with a good example of one. So just downloaded my good example of a weekly analysis. And here is one. Let me put it into view. Here's an example of a good one. So this one, it doesn't have a cover page, and that's okay. So I'll look at the format in a moment. It should have a cover page. This one doesn't. It's still an A paper because that's a minor problem there. And so look, it's little over 2 pages, perfect amount. Here I've deleted the last name, so this is an actual student paper, which I've reproduced with their permission. And here's what this person does. They say this in this case is a weekly analysis number 3. They get into talking about things in their own words. This one actually doesn't even use any footnotes. They didn't cite any outside material. It wasn't necessary. The paragraphs are of a good size. They say things in their own words. And this is here for your perusal. And this one's not perfect, however. There are a few issues. For example, this period is after the quotation marks. It should be inside and things like that. But this is still an A paper, so I want you to look through it and see what this person did here to see an example of a good paper. But also, I have an example of a mediocre one. So let's take a look at the mediocre example. Let's bring that up. Here it is. Okay. So this one already, you notice it looks different from this one. So this one's the right format. 12 point, look, 12 point, Times New Roman, 1-inch margins. It starts immediately. It's got a little title thing here and gets right into it. It's got last name and page number in the header. Great, great, great. This one, and I'll just enable editing so you can see it here. It's an Arial, 14 point, no last name and page number in the header. Way too much space here and here. This is not a footnote. My name is misspelled. That's not that big of a deal. There's a few, like Christianity is not how that's spelled. So there's a few spelling things here. Here, like this is supposed to be the word the. Obviously, it was sloppily put here. This is just lack of editing. So really, what's here is not too bad, but the format is so bad that it's not really good. So what I'm going to do here is show you what this should look like if I tidy this up. So let me put it Times New Roman, 12 point, double spaced. Let's make it look like it's supposed to look, and see what what the result is. So none of this stuff here. Here we put the last name and page number. Okay, so last name, whatever the last name is. I'm going to go to insert, page number, top of page, right header, bam, and actually let me put the last name again next to it. Last name, whatever the last name is. And here we go. Now the format looks pretty good. Now here, this I can see. Now this citation is not correct, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it out. And where this is done is right here. You can see this person was trying to quote the King James Bible. They did not quote it correctly, but at least what they should have done is put it in a footnote that should look something like this. At the end of the sentence, if you want to insert a footnote, you can actually go to Insert, and then you can go to Footnote. What I prefer to do is just press Control-Alt-F. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to press Control-Alt-F in Windows, paste that citation. It still doesn't look great, and the citation's not quite right. But if I tidy it up, still not quite right, but this looks a lot better. This is probably low B, in spite of some of the other problems in here, where there's a little bit of bouncing around. Here's another quote from the King James Bible, so I should probably stick that footnote. Control-Alt-F, stick it there again. Actually, I'm going to copy the footnote that was here. Here. Bam. So this looks better. You can still see it's under 2 pages, so that's part of the problem. It didn't quite meet the length. But here, and there's a few grammatical issues. This comma should be in these quotation marks and things like that. This does look bad. There's a little, if one has the ability, there's some grammar stuff that, like this, if one has the ability to, you could just put can there, for example. But this one's, here it's okay. If it had just been tidied up, like the way it was, would have been a low C. Okay? Here, just tidying it up, I'm thinking this is B territory. It's not bad. And but if you look at what's being said, it's not quite analytical. It's kind of a regurgitation of a lot of stuff. So this one's okay. And that's the issue here. But just tidying it up a little bit, the editing process makes things a lot better. So make sure you're going through and doing what you're supposed to do. Well, how do I know what I'm supposed to do? That's what the exemplar is for on Blackboard. I'll show you that again in a moment. But now let's look. I have one here that says weekly analysis terrible. Let's open it up. Okay. Actually, format's looking good. Okay, so what's the problem here? It's got last name. It's in the right format. Weekly analysis 3. It gets right to the point. The format actually looks better than the second one. Well, discussing utilitarian, that's not a word, leads me to have several opinions. In my humble opinion, all utilitarianism is a way for people to do what they want and to say to hell with how it affects others. Now, again, this is also reprinted with permission, okay? So this student got a little bit of saving graces for letting me reproduce this with permission. And if you just read this, there's some strange things going on. This sentence: any serial killer, rapist, pedophile, or any other lowlife you can think of could use this as a way to justify their actions. Seriously, as long as it makes them happy, then it's okay. And then this is under a page long, so that really should be an automatic 50. You got half the length in here. You're getting half the value of the grade. And then they literally put in here, the student put, I think they were asking the question, is this decent? Now, this was an actual submission. This was not something that was sent to me in an email beforehand. They actually asked the question, is this decent? Misspelling the word decent. Don't do this. But again, I was a little bit forgiving here. I said, your format's pretty good. Some of the things you're getting at are fine. But as it is, this is obviously not enough substance here, and also it was not edited very. Like, look, when you want to be happy, ought Burr happy. Obviously, this person wrote this very quickly and then never looked at it again and just turned it in, and it was not the right length. All right, and it didn't really do what I want. It's just unclear, and they don't back up what they're saying with any kind of evidence whatsoever. So don't do that. So what's the other thing that I have here? This formatting exemplar. Okay, this is the thing that shows you here's what the paper should look like, and it's actually filled with all kinds of advice. Okay, so let's enable editing. So let's take a look at this formatting exemplar. So this is an example of what your paper should look like with all kinds of notes that say, here's the things that you should do. Let's take a look. So first of all, here's the cover page. Here's what it should look like. You should have a title on here. You can call it Paper 1 or Weekly Analysis 1. This is just saying that it's the cover page for the Chicago Manual Style. You don't have to keep this here. And then what you'll do on the cover page, you'll put your name, the name of the class. This says Phil 102. We're actually in PHI 110, Introduction to Ethics, my name, and the date. That's what the cover page will look like. You notice there's no page number on the cover page. The first page with a page number is the actual first page of text. And here, last name and page number should be in the top right corner in the header. Look up here. See, I'm in the header on every page. Maybe a topic name again, and then get right into it, right here. Don't put a bunch of space. Like, sometimes people will do this thing where they put like a bunch of space before they get to it. Don't do that. Just get right into it. Now, this exemplar is actually like four pages with a giant We're Excited page. You're probably not going to have anything like this. What this is a bunch of examples of what it would look like if you cited stuff. So let's go through some of these things. So this is actually just filled with advice of what you should do, on what you should and shouldn't do on some things. So for example, the first thing here. What does it say? Avoid beginning your essay with sweeping generalizations like this one. But for thousands of years, people have wondered about the big questions of philosophy, ethics, and stuff. Avoid that in your writing. Don't start with a big generalization for any class. If you're in a biology class, don't be like, animals have lived on the earth for billions of years. Don't do that. Just get right to the point. Okay? This paper is all 12 point Times New Roman. As we can see up here, Times New Roman, 12 point. It is double spaced, as it should be, with 1-inch margins. You can even see them up here. All right, up here it's at 0, right here, and up here it's at 6.5 inches. That's 1-inch margins all the way around. And there are little bits of advice here on what to do. So this one, make sure your paper's formatted correctly. It states it here, and it is this in here. Okay. How you do quotations. So what I have in here are example of a bunch of quotations and how to cite them. You'll notice in the Chicago Manual of Style, like here's a footnote. Here's a footnote from Marx. Hitherto, men have constantly made up for themselves false conceptions about themselves, about what they are and what they ought to be. You notice the footnote comes at the end. So if you quote something, put the quote in there in quotation marks. Put the footnote at the end, and it should have a corresponding footnote down here. Here's what it should look like. Basically, first name, last name. Where'd you get it from? what book is it? What edition? Are there editors? What's the publisher? What year was it published? What page are you getting it from? If it's a book. So there's an example of a bunch of different things in here. So example of a book. Example from a book with multiple things in it. We've got an example of different kinds of books. An article. Here, this one. What does it look like to get something from an internet article? What does it look to quote a movie? What does it look like to quote a TV show? What does it look like to quote a journal? Now, you don't have to use any of these kinds of things. Here you go. Here's another example of how to quote a book. Okay. You don't have to use any outside sources whatsoever. This is not a research paper, but if you use them, here's how to cite a bunch of these kinds of things in footnotes with the quotations in here. So here's an example of what a quote looks like. Or an allusion. So for example, here's an allusion. This is not a quote. This is not a paraphrase. Here's just T'Challa is the king of Wakanda in the film Black Panther. That's an allusion. It still requires a footnote. So what? There you go. There's the footnote for what the film Black Panther should look like. Okay. There's some other bits of advice in here of what to do in your writing. Okay, so for example, here, this one, if someone said this, if you really think about it, avoid saying you in an academic paper. I don't mind if you use the first person. I don't mind if you say, I am going to argue this. That's fine. But saying you, I'll just read what it says here. Avoid the usage of the second person plural you, since this ultimately ends up referring to me, your professor. Instead, the sentence should be written in this way. If one really thinks about it, Plato was just trying to show that what one can know is accessible through one's own mind. Use one instead of you. Don't address the singular reader of your text as such in an academic paper. Okay, in all kinds of other writing, journalistic writing, that's fine. Blog posts, that's fine. Other kinds of writing, that's perfectly acceptable. Avoid it in academic writing. Again, first person's fine. Second person, not so fine. Okay? Let's take a look at a couple of other examples in here of things it says to do. Here you go. Here's another example. Don't use phrases like this. Okay? These kinds of assertions. I think Aristotle was right. Now, what's wrong here is not making the claim Aristotle was right. It's using qualifying language, I think. So sometimes people will say, I think, I believe, I feel. Get rid of this. Just come out and say it. Think of which one of these sounds more persuasive. I think Aristotle was right. I feel Aristotle was right. I believe Aristotle was right. All those things are qualified by this I think. Just come out and say it. Aristotle was right. That actually sounds bolder. Okay? The sentiment is the same. What you're trying to say, Aristotle was right. But this I think, I feel, I believe, all that kind of language makes what you're saying sound weaker. This, just coming out and saying it, sounds much more persuasive. Also, little bits of advice. Don't use parenthetical citations like this. Okay, I know you've probably been exposed to it in MLA and APA. That's not what I want. Don't do this. Okay, the footnotes should look. This one, for example, this Augustine page 51. Put it in a footnote like this. Okay, other little bits of advice. Try and avoid using a preposition at the end of a sentence. There's sometimes where it's appropriate, like who are you with? That's fine, but like where were you at? You can take the at out and the question still works. Where were you? Probably not going to be an issue here. I'm just going to say avoid it if at all possible. And then stuff like this, block quotations. Block if you quote text that is longer than 5 lines, it should look like this. Indent it, okay? Indent it, make it single-spaced, okay? Flush on the left side. Notice the whole thing's indented flush on the left side. Now, you should probably avoid altogether using quotations this large. Okay, I'll just say that as a bit of advice. Don't use big quotations like this, because if you're using it, usually you're one's using it just to fill space. Don't do that. But if you do it, you should spend, as large as the quotation is, you should spend just as much time unpacking it. Okay, so don't do that. So if you're going to do it, it should look like this. But I'm going to say, as a general rule, don't do that. Okay, but if you do it, here's what it should look like. Notice there's no quotation marks on it. It's flushed. It's singularly indented, and it's single-spaced. So, for example, what this person said here, they started quoting here. This is too big to quote like this. It needs to be in a form more like this, because it's longer than 5 lines. Okay, so that's the formatting exemplar, and like I said, this is basically the way that it should look. 12-point Times New Roman with little bits of advice on what to do and what not to do in the right column. And also, like I said, once you complete your Microsoft Word document, so you write it in Microsoft Word, whether that be the application version or the online version, but you'll get a .doc file, and what you'll do is you'll go to the assignment, browse your computer, and attach an actual .doc file. Don't give me a link, don't give me a PDF, don't give me an RTF, or any other form of link or document, Google Doc. It needs to be a Microsoft Word document, .doc or .docx. Attach it here, turn it in. Again, first one is due end of day, September 30th. Second one's due end of day, October 31st. Third one's due end of day, November 30th. And these all have 10-point penalties for each day in which they're late. Okay, so for example, this first, if you turn in the first one on October 2nd, the highest grade you're going to make is an 80, because it's automatically 2 days late. It's going to have a 20-point deduction for being 10 days late. So, and that will be extended all the way out. So that means, like, oh, you realize, oh, it's October 5th, and I guess I need to turn this in. Highest grade you'll make is a 50, but a 50 is better than a 0. Okay? So, you know, if you realize, oh, I didn't realize it was due on this day, and if you go in Blackboard, if you actually click on it, it will say, oh, it's due, look, October 1st at 12 a.m. October 1st at 12 a.m. means it's actually due at the end of day, September 30th. So that means if it comes in at October 1st, midnight being the start of the day, it's actually late. So make sure we get these things in on time. But that is your weekly analysis assignment. And again, this first one's coming up here pretty soon. Please get them in. Some of you have actually already turned in not only your first weekly analysis, I've had some students already turn in their second weekly analysis without having had this video, and they've actually done a really good job. Okay, the ones that I've graded so far have been A's. So I've been very happy. The format's right. This material has been here since day one, but I wanted to make a little video to explain it here. So please get those in on time. Again, they're on time if they're in. The first one's in by September 30th. The second one's in by October 31st. You might be thinking, oh, that's Halloween. You got a 2-page paper. You got tons of time to work on it, and you can get these in as early as you'd like, as some of you have already done. If you have any questions while you're working on this assignment, feel free to email me at burist@atc.edu. And also, I want you to keep in mind, too, basically this first one, the grading is going to get more stringent as we go through the semester. So the first paper, as long as you get 2 pages in the right format, you really can't screw it up. Okay, I'm going to give you some feedback saying, oh, don't do this, do what you did here as well. But here, things are going to be pretty easygoing. If you made some mistakes here, I'm going to expect them to be rectified by the second one, and same thing with the third. So the third one is going to be the most strictly graded, but you should have feedback at that point twice from the first 2. So I just want you to know that pretty much as long as you do the first assignment, you're going to be good. So like when I said here, those good, bad, terrible papers, those were actually weekly analysis 3s where that was the case. So for that first weekly analysis, get it in. I'm going to give you as much feedback as I possibly can to let you know, hey, what you did here was good, or this needs some work. But as long as it's in the right format and you get it in on time, there's really no reason why you shouldn't have an A or B. Okay, even if and turn in what you've got. So let me stress that too. If you're like, I don't really feel confident about this, I didn't really get, I didn't even make it to 2 pages. I'm not sure what to do. First of all, if that's the case and you're working on it early, go ahead and send me an email with what you got so far, and I'll try and give you a little pre-feedback. Okay, but when it comes to due date time, give me what you got at the time. Okay, all right. Something is better than nothing. All right, I look forward to reading these. And like I said, reach out to me at burst at atc.edu if you have any questions.